264 yards and 3 touchdowns for Jamar Chase, 428 yards and 4 touchdowns for Joe Burrow, 290 yards and 4 touchdowns for Lamar Jackson. If you're going up against these guys, hope is not lost. We will help you get there. Welcome to Fantasy Football Today on CBS Sports Network, presented by BetMGM, the sportsbook born in Vegas. I'm Dave Richard. I'm with Jamie Eisberg and Adam Mazer. Adam, why should people not lose hope just because they went up against Jamar Chase in fantasy?
Yeah, I think Jamie might remember this. The year was 2013. The week was week 1. We had a Superflex league, and I started Peyton Manning, and he scored about 60 points on Thursday night to start the season. 462 yards and 7 touchdowns. Probably the most confident I've ever been in winning a fantasy week. And I believe I lost to Jamie that week. So you never know what can happen. Just keep your head up. And if there's plenty of great things to do on a Sunday afternoon if you just don't want to watch football because you played against Jamar Chase. But it's not over yet. You never know. Don't get too cocky, Jamar Chase owners. And
never surrender when it comes to fantasy football. And we're here to help you out and give you some ideas on what to do with your lineup. We've got some start sit. We'll give you some names at quarterback, running back, and wide receiver. We've got some player props that can help you out in a different way. And we're answering your questions via social media using the hashtag AskFFT. And before we get into the Week 10 injuries, let's just quickly look back on this game. It was 35-34 Baltimore over Cincinnati. Felt like the game really flipped on a Chase Brown fumble in the third quarter, and then really just everything kicked into high gear for really the Ravens and for Jamar Chase, because Jamar Chase dominated in the fourth quarter. You already know how big these guys were as far as fantasy points goes. But Jamie, one guy that wasn't big was Zay Flowers. 7.4 PPR points. I mean, Lamar had almost 300 yards passing and 4 touchdowns, and Zay Flowers could not get in on any of that. Is there any cause of concern there?
No, I don't think so. We've seen some down games for him over the course of the season. This is just the diversity of this offense. And look, Mark Andrews, we know, has been, more down than up, but it's had some, positive moments lately. It's good to see him get involved. Rashad Bateman, who we thought was probably done with the Deontay Johnson trade, he has a big game. So this is just what this offense is. There's not a real go-to guy that you say, okay, this is the guy that's going to get Jamar Chase-like numbers, that's going to get 10-plus targets on a week-to-week basis. It's just not the nature of what Zay Flowers is and what they want him to be. So I think you just, maybe we got ahead of our skis a little bit and put him as a top 10 wide receiver for this week coming off the game he had against Denver. He's really more just a very good number 2 fantasy wide receiver. You're going to start him every week, and you know what he's capable of when he goes off. You just have to deal with some of the downs, and this is hopefully one of the rare occasions that he struggles with.
And are you good on dropping Deontay Johnson after he played just 5 snaps against Cincinnati?
I mean, I wrote that in the waiver wire column on Tuesday that he's a droppable player, and so coming off back-to-back games, yes, I don't think you're going to be wanting to roster Deontay Johnson unless you're absolutely desperate.
Adam, I'm not going to ask you about Mike Gesicki. Otherwise, the question would be, do you have a time machine so that I can go back and pull Mike Gesicki out of some of my lineups? But Chase Brown had 9 catches against Baltimore, and we know that this is the first game. No Zach Moss, Khalil Herbert's there. Is this the new version of Chase Brown? Is this what we should expect from him going forward, playing in this passing downs role and getting a bunch of catches every week?
Still don't know what they're going to do about third down going forward, but I do think he's going to catch a lot of passes. Joe Burrow is currently tied for third among quarterbacks in running back targets, and he's played an extra game than a lot of them. In fact, he's played 2 extra games in some of them, but he is going to be a factor throwing the ball to running backs. He always is. And now with Zach Moss off the field and Chase Brown playing a lot of snaps. Yeah, Chase Brown is probably going to average at least 3 catches a game, maybe more going forward. And I think you've got yourselves a top 12 running back rest of season, possibly a top 5 running back. He could be that good on this offense. Getting a goal line touchdown, I mean, that was great. Mm-hmm. Khalil Herbert will work in a little bit more. He only played 2 snaps, but regardless of how many catches it's going to be enough to make him a must-start running back.
I liked seeing him in on 9 of 16 third down snaps for Cincinnati, so that's something that he can build on. I think you're right. He can end up being a very good fantasy running back, top 10-ish type of guy rest of season. Let's move on to the injuries in Week 10, starting with the quarterback position. And there aren't a ton of quarterbacks that are hurt, but there are some notable ones that you need to be made aware of. And you already knew about Dak Prescott. It looks like he's going to go on IR. The Cowboys aren't saying when that will happen or even if that will happen. Dak wants to come back and play, but with his hamstring injury, we know he's not going to play in week number 10. Jamie, do you have a backup quarterback that you could recommend for people who have been starting Dak Prescott?
I mean, the first place to go is Daniel Jones, just from a 1-week situation based on the matchup against Carolina. Hopefully he continues to play well like we saw last week against Washington. And then if you're moving forward, you start to just play what's best matchups coming up. So I think you look at Jameis for week 11 taking on the Saints. That's a good matchup for him, as we know. It could be a revenge game. Drake May in week 12, he gets the Dolphins. That's a good situation. Also, you can just pivot to Drake May really, I think, across the board, because what he does with his legs is going to be very helpful. Not this week against the Bears. Don't love the setup for him. But, Tua may be on your waiver wire. We talked about that on Tuesday. You could be looking at Matthew Stafford on your waiver wire also. But if you're just going to go with the lower end roster percentage, guys, Daniel Jones for this week, pivot to Jameis next week, Drake May week 12. That should get you at least maybe to figure out what your situation is for the playoffs.
It looks like Trevor Lawrence is unlikely for week 10. As you saw on our graphic, that came from Jaguars coach Doug Peterson. Mac Jones starting for Jacksonville. I would not pivot to him at all. And Baker Mayfield didn't practice on Wednesday or Thursday. There doesn't seem to be much concern about that. Double check with CBSSports.com. How's that for fast? He returned to practice on Friday. Thank you very much, Jamie. Baker Mayfield should be good to go. I don't mind him as a low-end starter against the 49ers. Let's take a look at the running back list. It's a long list. There's a lot of names on it. Let's take it in for a second. Starting with the Bucs running backs, Bucky Irving is on here, and Rachaad White's not. Jacksonville's running backs, ETN and Tank Bigsby, they're limited. I don't think anybody's starting any of those guys with confidence, but I guess I'm just filibustering to get to the 49ers. Adam, he's back. Christian McCaffrey, limited in practice, but all indications are that he's good to go. Where, in your rankings, at least in your mind, where is Christian McCaffrey?
Can't imagine I'm sitting him. He's a top 10 running back at worst, and I would say probably closer to a top 5 running back. Barkley, Bijan, Henry, Kamara, Achane, that's your top 5. Mixon, I'd probably go ahead of him. And then I would say he'd be RB7 for me, RB7.
Where do you have him ranked, Jamie?
6th. I just think there's a lot of potential, even in maybe a limited role. We don't know exactly what the 49ers have planned for him. You should expect Jordan Mason to get some touches. If not Mason, there'll be Isaac Orendo. I hope they don't use all 3 guys. But I mean, McCaffrey in 10 touches against this Bucs defense could be an absolute stud, especially in the passing game. So like the setup for him. In terms of Brian Robinson, you saw him on the list. Did not practice on Friday, so probably not going to have him this week.
That means Austin Eckler back in play as a top 20 type of fantasy running back against the Steelers. And the Steelers' run defense, not quite as dominant as they've been in years past. Let's skip over tight ends. There really is anything there. Kyle Pitts was limited on Wednesday and Thursday. He should be good to go. Dallas Goedert will be back for Philadelphia as well. That could ruin things a little bit for Devontae Smith, who is on the injury list for wide receivers. So let's take a look at it, and you'll see Devontae Smith on there. But I think the real big name is going to be CeeDee Lamb. He hurt his shoulder last week, came back in. No Cooper Rush. No Dak Prescott, rather. Cooper Rush is going to be the quarterback for Dallas. Jamie, what's your confidence level on CeeDee Lamb?
It's obviously not as high as it would be if it was Dak with a healthy shoulder, but it's a backup quarterback, banged up receiver, and a very difficult matchup. There's only been one wide receiver in the last 4 weeks that have scored a touchdown or gotten over double-digit in PPR points against this Eagles defense, and that was Jamar Chase. And so they just do a great job of, since really their bye week, locking down wide receivers, doing a great job against opposing passing games. So if it was Dak, it would be probably like a top 10 ranking with Rush and the injury and the matchup. He's just barely inside the top 20.
Yeah, I get that completely. There's 3 names just to bring you up to speed. Friday updates, Keon Coleman out and may miss multiple weeks. That's somebody that in redraft leagues you might be dropping. Amari Cooper questionable for Buffalo's matchup this week against the Colts. And then Nico Collins back at practice on Friday after not practicing on Wednesday and Thursday. They are going to activate him off of IR. It doesn't mean that he's going to be active for week number 10, but that is obviously something that you're going to want to keep your eye on. Stay with CBS Sports throughout the weekend to get the latest on Nico Collins and his status if he plays. Adam, yes or no? If he plays, are you starting Nico Collins?
Yes, it would have to be he's going to play 10 snaps or something like that. If they say he's going to have limited snap count, I think he'll exceed the limitations. I almost certainly am starting Nico Collins if he plays.
And that would obviously raise the upside for somebody like CJ Stroud. Before we go to break, let's answer a question from X. Somebody sent us a question. They use the hashtag AskFFT. Always much appreciated. We look for that. It's from the Hoffer. Do you have any thoughts on this trade offer? He's got Kittle. The proposed trade is for Darnell Mooney. The backup tight end is Cade Otton, not Cotton. I assume he means Cade Otton. Jamie, which side of this trade would you rather have, Kittle or Mooney?
I'd rather have Kittle. I'd be trying to trade Mooney. I'd try to get Mooney for Cade Otton at this point. I think that's a fair deal given what Otton's situation looks like. Kittle could be the best tight end in fantasy without Brandon Ayuk on the field. So you got to get more for that than Darnell Mooney.
And with Cade Otton, when Mike Evans comes back, there could be a little bit of target shrinkage for Cade Otton, and we don't necessarily think it'll be so bad that he'll be useless, but he'll go from double-digit targets per game to maybe in that neighborhood of 7 to 8. Still really good for a fantasy tight end, so it's not like he's going to go back to the waiver wire when Mike Evans comes back. When we come back, we will talk about quarterbacks and running backs to start and sit. We'll do a little bit of ranking of some players, including Brock Purdy, who is Jamie Eisenberg's start of the week. Don't go anywhere. We're just getting started on Fantasy Football Today. Brock Purdy is Jamie Eisenberg's start of the week, and he has at least 28 fantasy points in 2 of his past 3 games. But how does he compare in our rankings and in our minds compared to guys like Jared Goff and Matthew Stafford? You can see that we all view him, including Sportsline with their projections, as a top 10 quarterback taking on the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Jamie, I don't need to do the talking on Brock Purdy. You're the one that's made the argument for him. Why do you like him, and would you start him over Jared Goff at Houston and Matthew Stafford against the Dolphins?
Yeah, I would. I think matchup is certainly in his favor, as much as those other guys have good matchups as well. Purdy has yet to have a back-to-back games with 20-plus fantasy points. Now he has the bye week in between, so you want to get some semantics and say he's not gonna do it in back-to-back weeks. But it's a great matchup. Tampa Bay has just been bleeding fantasy points to opposing quarterbacks of late. Patrick Mahomes 30 fantasy points last week. Kirk Cousins over 36 fantasy points in 2 meetings against them in the last 5 weeks, and Lamar Jackson over 40 fantasy points. Now you could say, is Purdy in that class of quarterback? I would say yes, based on how he's performed. And Christian McCaffrey's return on top of Juwan Jennings, which is a little bit of an underlying story here that's going to help this offense as well. There's just so much opportunity here for Purdy against this defense. They played so many snaps last week. I think it was 83 snaps in the overtime loss to Kansas City. This is tired, short week. They're looking ahead to their bye week. Purdy and the 49ers should do whatever they want.
So you'll take Purdy over Stafford and Goff. Who would you rank ahead of between Goff and Stafford?
It's Purdy, Stafford, Goff. Stafford should take advantage of this Dolphins defense along as Puncha Nakua does not throw another punch and get ejected. And Goff, look, he's just not having a lot of high-end games, but he certainly can against this Texas defense.
I like the upside of Stafford. It's the only reason why I would start him ahead of Brock Purdy. I obviously like the argument. I think he's a top 8 quarterback, but Stafford against that Dolphins secondary, I think he could have a really big game. Adam, where do you come out on these 3 quarterbacks? Who's your favorite? Who's your second favorite?
Purdy is my favorite. He's played really well this year. The stats haven't always been there, but he's throwing the ball downfield, getting a lot. Now he gets one of his best weapons back in Christian McCaffrey. So Purdy, number 1. And then I kept typing Goff, deleting it, putting in Stafford, typing Stafford, deleting it, putting in Goff. I had a really tough time with this. If they were going to throw the same amount of passes, I would easily go with Goff, but Stafford might throw 20 more. That being said, I did go Goff 2, Stafford 3. I like all 3 of these guys. I like them better than Daniel Jones. I like them better than Aaron Rodgers, better than Kyler Murray. They're all starts.
So let's see what you guys thought of these 3 quarterbacks. We take all of these, rank these 3, and we put it in a poll, and we put it on X, and we see what you guys think. And you guys, you're all in on Brock Purdy. Stafford just barely ahead of Jared Goff. So the audience agrees with you, Jamie. Brock Purdy as the top name on the list. Let's go to the next group of quarterbacks, see if we can go through these 3 very quickly. Daniel Jones taking on Carolina. A lot of people are scared to start him. People aren't as scared to start Baker Mayfield. He's taking on the 49ers, obviously. And then Kyler Murray against the Jets. Adam, how do you rank these 3 quarterbacks?
I go Kyler 1, Daniel Jones 2, Baker Mayfield 3. I am always a little bit more cautious with the Giants than I think you guys are, because they have such a low floor. Daniel Jones has scored, I want to say, 7 or fewer points in 3 or 4 games. When he's bad, he is so bad. Does have a great matchup, though, so I'll start him over Mayfield, but I'm a bit of a Kyler Murray apologist. I think his biggest issue, other than last week, he played poorly last week, but his biggest issue this year is he just doesn't throw the ball that much. They love to run the ball, and they will do that. I have enough faith, though, in the Jets to put up points, make this a bit of a shootout, so Kyler has to throw 30 or more passes. If he gets to 30, I think he'll be better than Daniel Jones. Kyler, Jones, Mayfield.
Yeah, I go back and forth, Adam, with Daniel Jones and Kyler Murray. I made the switch prior to the games yesterday to put Daniel Jones slightly ahead of Kyler, just because you could see a situation where he doesn't get to that high-end production, which is what we've seen from Kyler, whereas Daniel Jones, not playing in New Jersey, love that setup for him, and really just has a little bit of a safer matchup. So like Sportsline, they have him 9 and 10. I think I have Daniel Jones 11 and 12. Daniel Jones and Kyler Murray 11 and 12. It's funny to say that both over Baker Mayfield because Mayfield's clearly been the better of the trio here, best of the trio here. But without his top receivers, I just don't like the setup for him against San Francisco coming off their bye week. I think this is going to be one of Mayfield's worst games of the season. So both these guys, pretty significant margin ahead of Baker Mayfield.
We've seen a lot of bad games from Kyler Murray, and he's taking on the Jets. I think that Jets defense might have turned the corner. I'm reluctantly putting him third, just barely behind Baker Mayfield, and I am going to take the chance, rather, on Daniel Jones because of that matchup against the Carolina Panthers. I've been waiting to see these results, though. I want to see if the audience is on board at all with Daniel Jones, and they are not. They like Baker Mayfield the best. And, he has 22 fantasy points in each of his last 2 games without his wide receivers there. K. Dotton has been an absolute stud. So if he keeps leaning on him, even against the 49ers, I guess it makes sense. I just really love the upside for Daniel Jones, who came in second. It was close between him and Kyler Murray. I think fantasy managers are getting nervous. Let's move on to some running backs. Let's rank these 3 running backs. Jamie, I'll start with you. Najee Harris at Washington, Chuba Hubbard against the Giants, and in that same game, Tyrone Tracy against Carolina.
Yeah, I nearly made Tracy the start of the week. I love the setup for him taking on the Panthers. They just best matchup you can find in terms of fantasy points allowed to opposing running backs, and he's done a great job when given work. I think he's going to get work in this matchup. Don't worry about Devin Singletary. So Tracy is the favorite for me. Chuba would be second. We'll see what happens if Jonathan Brooks plays. How much work he gets. Does he get the Miles Sanders role? Does he eat into both of those guys? We'll have to see how that plays itself out. And then Najee's been fantastic. 3 straight games with 100 yards rushing. It is a little bit of a tough matchup against Washington that has turned the corner slightly in terms of how they defended running backs. But you got to give Najee some credit and hopefully fresh legs coming off the bye week. But I like all 3 of these guys, all 3 in my top 20, but it would be Tracy, Hubbard, Harris.
I have them ranked the exact same way, and they are all very good. Adam, how do you have them ranked?
I also have Najee last, but I could not really decide between Hubbard and Tracy. They are so even to me. I do have Hubbard ahead of Tracy. I'm not married to that at all. I'm married to someone else, happily married. But Chuba Hubbard, Tyrone Tracy is a total toss-up to me. The Giants' run defense is I think, actually significantly worse. They're so bad. Hubbard has a slightly better matchup. Tracy, though, still has a great matchup. Not involved in the passing game, though, when Malik Neighbors is on the field. So that's something to keep an eye on. Either one, toss up, but I go Hubbard, Tracy, Harris.
Okay, let's see what the results of the poll for these 3 running backs are. It's a runaway for Tyrone Tracy, Jamie. Maybe you could have done 2 starts of the week. Maybe, who knows? But everybody's on board with Tyrone Tracy. I think it's a combination of how good he's looked earlier this year and the matchup against Carolina. And we've just seen running backs dominate the Panthers, as we talked about. Chuba second, Najee Harris third. But that's not an indictment on Najee Harris. We all like him. You'll see how much we like him later on in the show. Let's go to one more before we go to break. 3 more running backs. Rico Dowdle against Philadelphia. Kareem Hunt against Denver. Ramondre Stevenson against Chicago. Is it easy to say, Jamie, that Kareem Hunt rather is the start because of how good he's been playing?
Yeah, I think so. Stevenson also is coming off 2 straight strong fantasy performances. It hasn't been pretty how he's gotten it done, but he's found the end zone. And that's really what these guys are going to have to do is score. For Stevenson, I like the fact that he's been a little bit more involved in the passing game lately, and hopefully that's something that continues. Rico Dowdle's coming off a very excellent performance against the Falcons, but with the situation surrounding him and knowing that he's facing a good Eagles defense, he's an easy third for me.
Adam?
Yeah, it's kind of interesting to put Kareem Hunt first, which I am doing, when he has 7 catches in 5 games. Rico Dowdle has 10 catches in his last 2 games. Ramondre, as Jamie just mentioned, more involved. So Hunt needs to score, but he scores every week. He's got 4 straight games with more than 20 carries. Ramondre, I think, is going to be better in this game. Then he's going to be good. He's going to have another solid performance. It's going to be a competitive game against a bad run defense. Dowdle would have been ahead of Ramondre if Dak Prescott were playing, but I'm just a little bit too nervous about the offense.
Okay, let's take a look at the poll results. I like Kareem Hunt as well as the best one, and so does the audience. This was pretty much a slam dunk for Kareem Hunt. Going up against the Broncos, not the easiest of matchups for him, but the way that he's been playing just makes all the sense in the world. And Rico Dowdle, maybe the point to be made here is that just because he had a good game last week doesn't mean he's going to have one this week against the Philadelphia Eagles. I do really like Ramondre's matchup against Chicago. That run defense has been falling off. Let's answer a tweet before we go to break. It's from Andrea. She needs one from Tank Dell, Tyrone Tracy, Najee Harris, and she's down 98 points, Jamie. So is there a miracle here?
I think the player with the highest ceiling is probably Tank Dell, but Tyrone Tracy, if he could, get 102 touchdowns, that's hard to say it's not possible taking on the Carolina Panthers. So I would stick with Tracy. It would be easy to go with Dell if Nico Collins was not going to play, but now it sounds like Collins will be back out there. So give me Tyrone Tracy.
Yeah, and especially if Nico's there, it's hard to really love Tank Dell and that upside. I agree with you on Tyrone Tracy. If you're looking for wide receivers to start or sit, we've got you covered right after this here on Fantasy Football Today. There's no question that DeAndre Hopkins' game last week is going to make us think about starting him more and more when it comes to fantasy football. But is he really a number 2 fantasy wide receiver moving forward? We'll talk about him, and let's compare him to a couple of other wide receivers here on Fantasy Football Today, going through some start-sit decisions. We're ranking some wide receivers, and DeAndre Hopkins is one of them. We're going to look at DeAndre Hopkins, compare him to Josh Downs, coming off of a down week, no pun intended, and Courtland Sutton, who's coming off of an up week with the Denver Broncos at Kansas City. Adam, how would you rank these wide receivers? Is DeAndre Hopkins at the top of the list for you?
No, of course not. Josh Downs. That was an easy one. Now, deciding between Hopkins and Sutton was difficult, but it's got to be Josh Downs. He's definitely Joe Flacco's favorite target, just gets a lot of targets and pretty safe PPR guy. Hopkins and Sutton have tough matchups, but I'm going to go with Hopkins over Sutton because I like the way the Chiefs use him in the sense that he'll be able to get away from Surtain a little bit. 40% slot rate, lower ADOT, targeted in the end zone. So I think that gives him a little bit of a chance. I don't really like Hopkins or Sutton that much this week, but definitely Downs ahead of them. Then I'll go Hopkins, then Sutton.
Are any of them number 2 wide receivers for you?
Downs for sure.
Downs is Adam. Is he, or Jamie rather, is he a number 2 receiver for you?
No, I agree with Adam almost entirely. I would actually go Sutton over Hopkins, but I don't love either one. I just think that the Broncos learned their lesson after what happened to Zay Flowers last week, and I think we see a little bit more of Surtain covering Hopkins and trying to take away their best option. And look, it wasn't great games for Rashee Rice last year against this Denver defense. It wasn't great games for Patrick Mahomes last year against this Denver defense. He combined in 2 games for 25 fantasy points. So this passing game may struggle once again. So I think what you're looking at with Sutton is he's probably going to get a lot of targets, mostly in garbage time, with the Broncos chasing points. I think the setup for Josh Downs is easily the best because Buffalo's defense, while they are going to make things a little tough on Joe Flacco, we've seen the worst game so far for Josh Downs with Joe Flacco, 12 PPR points. That's a pretty good floor.
Yeah, that's a good floor for him, but I am worried about the ceiling. I think this is a tough matchup for Josh Downs against Buffalo. It's not like receivers have been crushing Buffalo week after week after week, and Joe Flacco really let us down last week. I don't know how much he can bounce back. So I'm a little bit nervous about Josh Downs, and listen, I know it's crazy to trust the receiver catching passes from Bo Nix, especially against the Chiefs, but I think that there will be a lot of them. I think volume carries the day. Give me Courtland Sutton over Josh Downs and both of them over DeAndre Hopkins. Just nervous that DeAndre Hopkins is a touchdown or bust wide receiver, much less a 2 touchdown or bust wide receiver moving forward. We asked the audience for every single one of these pods of 3 who they would take first, and the audience was all about DeAndre Hopkins first, Josh Downs second, and they didn't even want to think about Courtland Sutton as a third option. So I am playing contrarian in this role, but you guys really love DeAndre Hopkins against the Denver Broncos. Let's up the ante a little bit at wide receiver. These are guys that I think are kind of borderline number 2 wide receivers in week number 10. Brian Thomas Jr. now without Trevor Lawrence. He is unlikely to play, according to Coach Doug Peterson. He is going up against, in this start-sit exercise, DJ Moore taking on the Patriots, and Marvin Harrison Jr., who let us down last week, and now he's taking on the Jets. Jamie, how would you rank these 3 wide receivers?
Yeah, Thomas would have been the easy call for sure with Trevor Lawrence, but I'm still going to take him first. I just think Mac Jones will hopefully give him some more opportunities and more than just the 4 or 5 targets we've been seeing. Plus, we could see a situation where they're chasing points, and easily has the best matchup. The Vikings give up the most fantasy points to opposing wide receivers. I'm going to go Harrison second and DJ Moore third. I don't like what's going on in Chicago with DJ Moore and Caleb Williams. Probably a tough matchup if he gets Christian Gonzalez. Harrison was a disappointment last week, but really the entire passing game for the Cardinals was, and I think we'll see them bounce back against the Jets. Adam talks about this a lot. I don't know if you have the numbers in front of you, Adam, so I don't want to put you on a spot, but how number 1 receivers typically do well against the Jets, despite the thinking that Sauce Gardner and that secondary can shut down almost everybody. They don't. And so I think Harrison still has an opportunity to make some plays. And I've said this a lot on our Fantasy Football Today podcast. When he gets 6+ targets, the numbers have been there. He's got 2 games so far this season where he's had 6+ targets where he didn't get at least 14 PPR points. I think it's happened 7 times. So give him the chances to make plays and he will come through. And hopefully that's the case this week. So Harrison second, and then I'm going to try and stay away. I just like those other 2 guys better. I think it's a better situation.
So where does Darnell Mooney rank compared to those 3? Is he like way ahead of them?
Not way ahead, but ahead.
Ahead? Okay. And what about Khalil Shakir?
Ahead of them as well.
Okay. All right. Interesting. Adam, do you see it the same way?
I wouldn't put Shakir ahead of Brian Thomas Jr., but I agree with basically everything Jamie said. I do go Brian Thomas Jr. sort of reluctantly now that it's Mac Jones instead of Trevor Lawrence, then Marvin Harrison, and then DJ Moore. Some of the number 1 receivers against the Jets. Calvin Ridley had kind of a lucky game. He had that insane catch, but he had a big game. Cortland Sutton had 60 yards and a touchdown in a game where I think there were 60 passing yards in that game. Justin Jefferson had 92 yards and he drew some pass interference calls. George Pickens, 111 yards and a touchdown. Tank Dell just had 126 yards. Harrison is equal time on the right side and the left side. He's not going to get shadowed by Sauce Gardner. I think he'll be okay. I don't love these guys this week. I did love Brian Thomas before the Lawrence injury, but yeah, I rank them the same way.
I almost feel like Thomas is the only one that can make like a monster play, like 50+ yards from these 3 wide receivers. I know 2 weeks ago we saw Marvin Harrison catch a bunch of deep passes. It was against Miami. The week after that, he was still getting targets downfield. His ADOT did not go down at all, and the numbers were really bad. So he's very much a boomer bust type of wide receiver. He's third for me. I've got DJ Moore second, capable of making some big plays, but that matchup against New England does scare me a little bit, more so for Caleb Williams' perspective, going up against a man coverage defense like the Patriots. I will take my chances with Brian Thomas Jr. Let's see what the audience said. Do they feel the same way? They do. 51% in favor of Brian Thomas Jr. against the Vikings over Marvin Harrison Jr. and DJ Moore third. We've got one more wide receiver group to go through, and I don't know if anybody really wants to start any of these wide receivers, but you got to make a call. So, Adam, who would you start between Juwan Jennings at Tampa, Jalen Waddle at the Rams, who had a touchdown last week but not 10 fantasy points, Jameson Williams, back from his suspension at Houston? Rank them.
All right, I know you guys are not going to agree with me, but I'm going Jalen Waddle first. Then I'm going Juwan Jennings, and then I'm going Jameson Williams. And if you could find another guy who has a J, we can throw him in there too. But yeah, Waddle, look, he's due to a degree. It's tough. They throw to Achane too much. They throw to Jonnu Smith too much. Tua has the lowest air yards per pass attempt in the NFL. It's a horrible environment for Jalen Waddle, but the Rams stink against the pass. Just throw the ball 35 times. I think it's going to be a shootout, and you're going to have a really good game for Tua and Tyreek Hill and hopefully Jalen Waddle. Jennings is really, I just don't know what to expect from Jennings. Love the matchup, but the last time we saw him have a huge game, both Debo and Kittle were out. They're playing. Obviously, Ayuk is out. I don't know about that. Jameson Williams, I expect 3 to 4 targets. So I'm not ready to throw him back in. He is the magic 8 ball. You know, you got to odds are in your favor. You don't know what the 8 ball is going to say, but he's going to be last for me.
I'll throw in one more J name, Jordan Addison. Is he ahead of these guys or behind these guys?
I'll put him ahead of Jameson Williams. I'll put him third.
Okay. Forget about Jordan Addison, Jamie, another J name. But how do you rank these 3 wide receivers?
Yeah, I'm looking at my rankings now, and it's probably going to change. I do think Waddle is last, but I don't think Adam's wrong in what he said. He's due for a big game. There's an opportunity here based on this Rams defense. You just got to get rid of Tua looking to the checkdowns and start looking a little bit more down the field. It would help Tyreek Hill as well. So there's an opportunity here for Jalen Waddle to step up, but I'm going to put him last. I actually think Jameson Williams is the one that I'm going to trust the most from the standpoint of I want to take my chances with him getting some big plays against this Texans defense. We've seen it. I know, they may be getting some help on the back end of the defense here, but I like the setup for him coming off, mostly because of Dan Campbell. I think this is we want to show that he's our guy, support our guy, and get him some chances to make some plays in a spotlight game. So I like the setup for him. I also like the setup for Juwan Jennings just based on the matchup. So they're all on a very even plane, and by the time we get to Sunday, one might be ahead of the other, but I'm going to put Waddle third and the other 2 guys very close.
Yeah, good luck to starting any of these guys. I like the matchup best for Juwan Jennings. I think there could be the most opportunities for Juwan Jennings, so I will go with Juwan Jennings. And Jamie, you mentioned Tua Tagovailoa stopping with the check down throws. He started to do that in the second half last week, and you know what? it wasn't bad at all. So maybe if he feels like he has a little bit more time, more than a second and a half before letting go of the football, he does get it going. And of course, Waddle scored in the second half last week. This is a tough one. All three of these guys, no one's really excited about, but I'm curious to see the results of the poll to see where the audience came out on Jennings, on Waddle, on Jameson. And they like Jennings the best, and it's not by a close margin at all. 43% for Jawan Jennings. Jalen Waddle, 0.2 of a percentage point ahead of Jameson Williams. If this is one of the calls that you've got in your fantasy team, good luck in week number 10. They could all be great. They could all be terrible. That's just kind of where they are right now in the fantasy landscape. Let's answer a question from Holmes. Sup, Holmes? Which player would you bench this week? Jonathan Taylor, Tyrone Tracy, Darnell Mooney, James Conner, Adam Azer. Which one would you sit?
Darnell Mooney, but that's a really tough choice there, but I would go with the running backs.
Jamie, you agree?
I do agree, yeah.
Okay. I think it's close between Mooney and Conner. I think there's more boom bust to Mooney than there is to Conner, so if you want to play it safe, just go ahead and sit Darnell Mooney. When we come back, it's player props to help you win some money and to talk about some players that are relevant in fantasy football. Don't go anywhere. FFT on the way back. This is Fantasy Football Today on CBS Sports Network, and this is what our player prop results should look like every single week. Katie Mox, the queen of player props, was 5-0, as was I, and Jamie 4-1. That helped our records immensely. Jamie, much closer to 500. I am now 5 games over 500, but I am still not crushing it like Katie Mox. 24-16, 5-0. I believe this is her. Yeah, she's 5-0 in back-to-back weeks. And I think we should mention Adam Azer, 3 games below 500 with player props. Adam, it's time for you to turn the corner and how about you sweep the week with player props so that you're over 500 and that you don't look like a schmo on that graphic there where you're below 500. Jamie loves Jamar Chase. We all do. Or maybe it's Chase Brown that he loves. Could be either one of them. But no, we can't predict player props for players who have already played in week 10. But here's how the BetMGM player prop challenge goes. I'm going to name a player. I'm then going to name a stat. Jamie and Adam, they're going to project what that stat will be for that player. And then I will tell them whether or not I agree or disagree based on how I like the player prop. So now that I've hit my microphone, let's go ahead and get started.
The 31st best game of the fantasy community. Right?
It's something like that. What could be better than Who Has More? That's a game that we play on Tuesdays here on CBS Sports Network. All right, Bo Nix playing Kansas City. How many rushing yards will Bo Nix have this week, guys? And we know that this is something that he likes to do, is run around a little bit, but will it be a lot? Will it be a little? He's going up against the Chiefs. I'm filibustering. Jamie's going with 32. I don't even know if Adam has a whiteboard. We're going to find out right now. What is that?
This is one of my kids' birthday presents. I'm going to say 28.
All right, so you are both on the over of 24.5 rush yards, and I agree with you. He's been over in 3 of his past 4 games. The one game where he didn't go over this number was against Carolina. He didn't have to. They don't pressure defenses. Keep that in mind when we talk about Daniel Jones. He had 4 or more scrambles in 3 of those 4 games, meaning that these are not designed runs. Pressure's on him, he takes off. I think this is easy for him to get 25 yards. Brock Purdy had 27 yards against this Kansas City defense. Do either of you think that Bo Nix is a top 12 quarterback this week? Top 15 quarterback this week?
No.
Top 20 quarterback this week?
No.
Oh, would you even roster him in a 1 QB league?
If I lost Dak Prescott and I'm looking to play the matchups moving forward, yes. But
would you have a steak dinner with him? I mean, how far down are we going here? But Bo Nix, obviously for fantasy we don't love him, but for this player prop we do. Let's move on to the next one. This is somebody that you are going to start in fantasy this week, Najee Harris. How many rushing yards will Najee Harris have? Adam, Jamie, can you guys project the rushing yards for Najee Harris at Washington? And, of course, he had over 100 yards 3 straight weeks. Not trying to influence you guys. You might say lower. Jamie's going with 86. Reminds me of Hines Ward when I think about the Steelers. And Adam on his kid's whiteboard going with 7. What's with the clouds and the sun?
I just drew a happy picture for you guys, you know?
That's okay. You look more like a weatherman trying to tell me what the temperature is going to be outside. Partly cloudy, 73 degrees. Let's go to traffic with Jamie. No, it's not like that at all. All right, you're both going over 63.5 rushing yards. And I agree with that one as well. It's at minus 119. The Giants and the Jets allow fewer fantasy points per game than the Commanders do. Those are two of the three teams that Najee Harris just lit up for over 100 yards. The Commanders, league worst, 5.2 yards per carry to running backs on the season. I think it's a slam dunk for Najee Harris. Would either of you be surprised if Najee Harris finished as a top 12 fantasy running back this week?
I think it would be a bad week for the position if he did. Because there's so many good players at that position that are healthy right now and playing well and great matchups. So given the fact that he's not proven to be a multiple touchdown guy, that he's not proven to be a significant factor in the passing game, like it would have to be one of those two things changing dramatically.
And if you rewind about 20 minutes on the show, we like Najee Harris, but we do like a lot of running backs better than Najee Harris, including Tyrone Tracy. All right, next player prop has to do with DeAndre Hopkins and his receiving yards. How many yards will DeAndre Hopkins have this week against the Denver Broncos? We've already talked about Hopkins. We did a rank these three with Hopkins and a couple of other wide receivers. Jamie's going with 58.
Oh, yeah.
And Adam, I don't know what your weather report's going to look like, but you're on 53. Are those trees? What's going on?
Yeah, happy little trees. You know, just draw some happy little
Oh, my goodness. All right, well, the prop is 51.5 receiving yards, which means you guys are now on the over. I'm taking the under. We've talked all week about how tough this matchup is with Patrick Surtain, and it's not just him. It's all of the members of the Broncos secondary. They play really well. How about this? Last year against Kansas City, Rashee Rice, he did not do very well against the Denver Broncos, under 12 PPR points in each of those games. 6 wide receivers have had at least 8 targets against Denver this year. Only half of them have had more than 45 yards. And if you take away that big catch that DeAndre Hopkins had last week, remember it was like a jump ball, caught it, it was double coverage, kind of tough to imagine him doing week after week after week. If you take that away, 51 yards, and 51 yards was less than 51.5 yards. So I'm going to say that he goes under. I'll stand alone on that island. Next one, Jonathan Taylor, and I know you're starting Jonathan Taylor in fantasy football. How many rushing attempts will he have in his game against the Buffalo Bills? And I'll ask you this question as well. Do you think he can get over 100 yards in the game?
Yes.
Jamie says yes to 100 yards. 16 for Jamie. Did you say 16 as well with a U?
Yeah.
So now you're,
that's for me.
All right. So very interesting. You guys are then taking the under because it's 17.5. And I agree with you on that one. And it's juiced to the over. So taking the under, you only have to lay 103. Only 3 running backs all year have had 18 or more carries against Buffalo. Only 1 since week 5. And we got a glimpse last week. Indianapolis in a competitive game, maybe playing from behind a little bit against Minnesota. Only 13 carries for Jonathan Taylor. So unless Indianapolis builds a lead in this one, I don't think that Jonathan Taylor is going to have 18-plus carries. And when they do win, and it's been more with Anthony Richardson when he's played, we've seen Jonathan Taylor get a lot more carries. If the Colts win, I think Jonathan Taylor goes over. I think Buffalo's going to win, which means he will go under. We have one more player prop, and it's a player near and dear to Jamie's heart this week. It's Brock Purdy. How many pass attempts for Brock Purdy against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers? That's what you guys have to predict. We all like Brock Purdy as a top 10 quarterback in fantasy this week, but he's taking on Tampa. Does that change anything? 32 attempts for Jamie Eisenberg. What does Adam Azer say? 35? I don't know. What?
That's the 3 of us playing football in the park.
That's a football?
It's a hell of a football.
That looks like a frisbee more than anything.
I was in a rush.
I think you put a halo on somebody.
Yeah. Which one of us has all that hair?
Me. That's me. Jamie's in the middle. He's the tallest. And Dave, you threw the football over Jamie's head to me. We're playing monkey in the middle. 35 passes.
Jamie being the tallest. Okay, that's news to me. All right, the number's 31.5 for Brock Purdy. So Jamie, you're over by half an attempt. I'm taking the under. In wins, the 49ers have seen Brock Purdy attempt 27.5 passes, never any more than 29 attempts in a game. In losses, he's averaging 33 pass attempts per game, but only in 2 of those losses has he gone over 31 pass attempts. So I think this is going to be a game with Christian McCaffrey back. Jordan Mason looks like he's healthy. Who knows what role Isaac Guerrero is going to play or if Deebo Samuel gets some runs. I think the 49ers will be able to run against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, who, by the way, have allowed at least 18 PPR points to 3 straight running backs. Keep that in mind when you think about Christian McCaffrey. You can say anything you want.
I really I was worried too much about the picture, and I'm not really thinking 35 is way too high. Can I change it to under?
No. You've made your choice. You've done your drawing. Your football drawing stinks. I think you got me right with the hair, though, unfortunately. I guess that's just how it goes. All right, quick tweet before we go to break. This is from Jack. You have to start two of these guys. Chubbs Hubbard. I kind of like that nickname for him. Drake London, Najee Harris, Devontae Smith. Jamie, which two do you like?
I'm going to go the first two. Hubbard, great matchup against the Giants. Again, hopefully Jonathan Brooks doesn't take too much work away from him if he plays. And Drake London they should do whatever they want to the Falcons against the Saints. No Marshawn Lattimore anymore, so easy matchup for London.
That's a great answer to a great question. I say we answer more questions from our audience when we come back to wrap up the show. This is Fantasy Football Today. Putting a bow on this edition of Fantasy Football Today. And before we answer your tweet, I want to let you know that Shane Steichen has ruled out Michael Pittman from this week's matchup against Buffalo. You're going to have to find somebody else to start. Michael Pittman and his 7.1 PPR points per game should be on your bench, or maybe in a 10-team non-PPR league on your waiver wire. And it does make Josh Downs look much better this week. Probably would start Josh Downs as a number 2 fantasy wide receiver. Jason wants to know how we'd rank these guys rest of season, and it's a long list. Keon Coleman, Christian Watson, Jalen Coker. I believe that's Elijah Moore. Well, let's just go with it because DJ Moore would be ahead of these guys. Cedric Wilson, Mike Williams. Jamie, is there one guy on this list that you would be more excited about than the rest?
It would be Keon Coleman if he's healthy, but who knows how long this wrist injury is going to keep him out. I'm hoping Christian Watson comes off the bye and has a better connection rapport with a healthier Jordan Love. And then Elijah Moore is very interesting just based on how much Jameis Winston has thrown the ball. So I'll take my chances with Watson, I guess, just based on upside.
I would too. I am kind of curious about Mike Williams. It's based on how the Steelers' offense has looked in 2 games with Russell Wilson and the opportunity that he might get. But I think I'd still rather carry Christian Watson on a roster spot than Mike Williams. And if Keon Coleman wasn't going to miss time, he would easily be the name at the top of my list. Next question, please. It's from Dev. Should I trade Brian Thomas Jr. for Amon-Ra St. Brown full PPR help? You needed to ask that. Adam, is there any reason why you wouldn't make this trade?
Yeah, well, no, I would do it, but it's a reasonable question because St. Brown gets so few targets, so few catches, so few yards, but he scored a touchdown in 6 straight games. If you don't believe that that's sustainable, you could think about maybe selling high on Amon-Ra St. Brown, but I wouldn't do that. I think it's just as likely that the targets will go back up and he'll be insanely good. So, yeah, I would definitely take St. Brown over Brian Thomas Jr.
I would agree as well. Just for the record, Amon-Ra St. Brown averaging a ton of PPR points per game. Next question. Jonathan wants to know, trade away CeeDee Lamb and bench spot for Puka Nacua and Reed or Aaron Jones. And then there's like a bunch of other questions. And then he lists his team. This is a little too much for me to handle. So let's just make it simple.
Yes, you should trade Lamb for Puka
and Reed.
Yes,
like, I think that's a slam dunk. I think Puka might be better than Lamb. Listen, CeeDee Lamb's got a bad shoulder. We don't know when his quarterback's going to come back. This Dallas offense has been very hit or miss. I think it's obvious that if you can sell high on CeeDee Lamb, you should do it. And this is absolutely selling high. Now, I wouldn't. Would you trade CeeDee Lamb just for Jaden Reed? No.
But I would trade him just for Aaron Jones, and I would definitely trade him just for Puka Nacua.
Next question, please. From Daniel, Stroud, Stafford, or drop one for Daniel Jones. Do you like Daniel Jones enough to start him over Stafford, Jamie?
No. And I would just keep Stroud and Stafford. Stafford's already passed his bye week, and hopefully Stroud with the healthy Nico Collins is going to get going. So start Stafford this week and stash Stroud.
Do we have one more question? It's from Cody. Should I trade Deebo Samuel for Devontae Adams, Adam?
Oh, you can give the Adams questions to people who aren't named Adam, Dave, but I would keep Deebo Samuel. I prefer him slightly to Devontae Adams. This is a good question, though, Cody. Thank you.
And no more bye week for Debo. You still have the Devontae Adams bye week.
If we had somebody named Samuel on the show, I would have given the question to him. That's going to do it for this edition of Fantasy Football Today. Remember, we are here every Tuesday, Wednesday, Friday on CBS Sports Network, and our podcast drops every day, both on YouTube and wherever you go to get your podcast. For our whole crew, Adam Azer, Jamie Eisenberg, and myself, Dave Richard, thank you for watching. Good luck in week number 10.